The sun was just beginning its slow climb over the horizon, casting a soft golden glow across the airbase. The air was still and crisp, holding that early morning quiet that makes even the smallest sounds stand out. Somewhere far off, a lone gull cried, its call drifting lazily through the open sky. For a moment, it was hard to believe that this place, this stretch of tarmac and hangars, was capable of shaking the earth with sound. But it was, and it would, very soon. On the runway, the jet sat like a predator crouched and waiting. Its sleek, aerodynamic frame seemed almost alive, catching the first rays of sunlight along its polished fuselage. The paintwork was pristine, yet there was a kind of purposeful wear in the faint streaks around the exhaust ports, evidence of past missions and the heat of countless takeoffs. Even sitting still, it radiated power, silent power, the kind that promised movement faster than thought. Inside the cockpit, the pilot sat in a stillness that matched the aircraft's. His gloved hands rested lightly on the controls, not yet gripping, not yet pushing, just touching, as if testing the reality of what was about to happen. The tinted visor hid his eyes, but beneath it, his gaze was fixed on the horizon. He was running through the sequence in his mind for the 100th time. Fuel flow, flaps, throttle, afterburners. Every switch and lever was exactly where it needed to be, but his mind traced them anyway, building muscle memory like a silent rehearsal. A bead of sweat rolled down his temple, not from heat, but from the hum of anticipation in his veins. Flying wasn't new to him. He'd done this countless times, but that moment before the engines came alive was always the same. A tight coil of energy inside his chest, ready to spring loose. The runway stretched out before him like a black ribbon, marked with sharp white lines that seemed to vanish into the haze of distance. To either side, the grassy fields were motionless, waiting. The control tower, tall and watchful, stood against the pale sky like a sentinel. Somewhere inside, a voice would soon speak, giving the clearance that would unleash everything. For now, the only sound inside the cockpit was the faint hum of electronics and the rhythmic click of system checks. The smell of aviation fuel hung faintly in the air, mingling with the sterile scent of the cockpit's interior. Leather straps, metal surfaces warmed by the early sun, and the faint ozone of the electrical systems. He took a deep breath, feeling the oxygen flow through the mask, cool and clean. It steadied him. His heartbeat slowed slightly, though it still thudded in his ears. Through the thick canopy glass, the morning looked deceptively calm. The sky was painted in soft blues and pale oranges, streaked with thin, high clouds that looked like brush strokes. But in minutes, that calm would be ripped apart by sound and motion. The ground crew moved with silent efficiency below, their bright vests catching the light as they made final inspections. One of them raised a hand to signal readiness, and the pilot gave a small nod in return. The canopy reflected the scene like a dark mirror, hiding his face, but revealing the glint of machinery and movement around him. He reached up and adjusted his helmet strap. The motion was slow, deliberate, part habit, part ritual. Every pilot had their own way of locking into focus before takeoff. For him, it was this. One final adjustment of gear, one deep breath, and one last look at the sky. His eyes drifted to the horizon again. Somewhere out there, high above the visible world, the jet would soon be climbing, pushing through the sound barrier, tearing across invisible borders of speed. But right now, the horizon felt like a wall, something to be broken through. The radio crackled softly. Echo 1, stand by for clearance, came the calm voice from the tower. Copy, standing by, he replied. His own voice measured and steady, though his chest felt like it carried the weight of a coiled spring. The silence stretched again. It wasn't empty, it was heavy. Every second felt longer than the last. The jet was ready, the pilot was ready, and the runway seemed to hum with the tension of what was about to happen. A soft breeze stirred the grass at the edges of the tarmac, and a small swirl of dust lifted briefly, dancing in the air before settling again. Even that tiny movement felt amplified in the stillness. Inside the cockpit, he checked the HUD one last time, scanning numbers, gauges, and indicators. All green, no warnings. The machine was flawless. He thought about the first time he had ever flown, years ago in a much smaller aircraft, feeling the thrill of leaving the ground for the first time. That memory had never faded, and even now, on the edge of a far more powerful flight, it lingered in the back of his mind like an old song. A faint vibration under the seat told him the auxiliary power unit was running smoothly. The real power, though still slept, waiting for his command to awaken. And then came the words, "Echo 1, you are cleared for takeoff. Winds light from the north, runway clear." A subtle smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. The moment had arrived. He placed his right hand firmly on the throttle and his left on the control stick. The cockpit, the runway, the sky, they all seemed to narrow into a single point of focus. His breath deepened. The coiled energy inside him tightened, ready to snap. But before he pushed forward, he let himself pause for just one more second. One more heartbeat in the quiet. Because he knew, once the engines roared to life, the world would change in an instant. The ground would tremble, the air would burn, and silence would be nothing but a memory. In that final moment of calm, he could almost hear the sky calling to him. And then, without hesitation, he began to push the throttle forward. The throttle moved forward under his hand, smooth but with a weight that demanded intention. It wasn't just a lever, it was the key to unleashing a storm. As it slid into position, the twin engines behind him woke with a low, throaty rumble, like a sleeping beast stirring from a long slumber. That rumble deepened. The airframe trembled. Then came the growl, deeper still, vibrating through his seat, through his bones, through the very ground beneath the jet. The sound was no longer just heard, it was felt. With each fraction of throttle increase, the engines, built on themselves, layers of sound stacking, thickening, sharpening, until the growl became a roar. A hot blast of air rippled behind the jet, distorting the view of the runway and sending stray bits of dust swirling in chaotic little whirlwinds. In the control tower, glass panels quivered in their frames. On the grassy fields nearby, small birds shot into the air, startled from their morning stillness. The world around the jet reacted to its awakening like nature itself knew something powerful was about to leave the earth. The pilot kept his eyes fixed forward, gaze locked on the narrowing perspective lines of the runway. His gloved fingers flexed slightly over the stick, feeling the vibrations through the metal. The HUD flickered faintly as the avionics synced perfectly with the surge of power. The afterburners ignited with a flash, two concentrated blasts of fire and heat that expanded instantly into roaring plumes. The roar became a thunderclap, stretched into a constant, unrelenting wave. It was no longer a sound. It was an atmosphere, a physical pressure that pressed against his helmet, chest, and ribs. He felt the first real push as the jet began to roll forward, a slow crawl at first, deceptive in its gentleness. But the engines were far from idle. Every passing second piled on acceleration, building like a tidal wave. The wheels rattled faintly over the textured tarmac as speed climbed from a whisper to a shout. The G-forces began to press him back into his seat. It wasn't an uncomfortable feeling. On the contrary, it was exhilarating, the sensation of pure momentum taking physical form. The runway markers blurred past, faster and faster, white lines becoming streaks. The cockpit vibrated in sync with the deep pulse of the engines. His ears caught not just the sound of the jet, but the changing pitch as it accelerated, an evolving mechanical music tuned for speed and precision. The stick felt alive under his hand, transmitting every micro-shift of airflow along the wings. Wind began to howl around the canopy, joining the chorus of mechanical thunder. Outside, the landscape was no longer still. Grass bent violently under the exhaust blast, pebbles skittered across the ground, and even the heat shimmer from the afterburners seemed to stretch farther behind with every heartbeat. 60 knots. The calm, computer-precise voice from his instruments announced. He didn't answer. His focus was beyond numbers now. He felt the speed as much as he measured it. The acceleration didn't plateau. It multiplied. The runway seemed to shorten, closing in from both ends. The jet's nose subtly lightened, the weight shifting, as lift began to gather under the wings. 80 knots, 90. The vibrations grew smoother, paradoxically. At higher speeds, the jet wasn't rattling so much as slicing, each movement of air becoming a precise channel rather than a random buffet. 100 knots. The edges of his vision narrowed, not from fatigue, but from pure concentration. The horizon ahead felt magnetic, pulling him toward it at impossible speed, 120. The stick grew more sensitive, almost eager. He could feel the aircraft's intent now, as if it were asking for permission to leave the ground. 140. Rotate, came the voice in his headset. He eased back on the stick. The nose lifted smooth and steady as the main wheels still thundered along the runway for a final few seconds. And then, freedom. The sensation of weight against the wheels vanished as the landing gear left the ground. The world below dropped away. The change was instant, but vast. The vibration of wheels against tarmac was replaced by the pure, clean rush of air. The jet's shadow, once touching the runway, now sped away from it at a diagonal, shrinking. He didn't climb gently. The afterburners were still engaged, pouring raw thrust into the sky. The nose pointed upward at a sharper angle, pulling the jet into a steep ascent. The city, visible beyond the airbase, began to shrink rapidly, its grid of streets and rooftops flattening into a miniature map. The morning haze seemed thinner up here, each breath tasting sharper through the oxygen mask. Below, the runway already looked like a strip of black thread. The control tower, tall on the ground, was now a small shape against the landscape. Even the distant hills were lowering beneath him, though in truth it was he who was climbing past them. The G-forces shifted now, pressing him backward more than downward, the weight of acceleration holding him firm against the seat. His vision stayed steady, trained on the widening horizon. The jet's wings sliced through a thin layer of clouds, sending wisps of vapor curling off their edges. Sunlight flared briefly in the cockpit as he emerged above the first cloud deck, the world beneath him becoming a pale, swirling sea. The engine's roar didn't diminish with altitude. It deepened, filling the cabin like a constant reminder of the unstoppable momentum carrying him higher. He kept the throttle pinned, letting the climb continue at full power. Another layer of clouds approached, thicker this time, and the jet speared through it without hesitation. For a second, visibility dropped to near zero, a tunnel of white, engulfing the canopy. But he trusted the instruments and his own experience. The sensation of speed was even more intense here, like tunneling through solid air. Then, in an instant, he burst out above the second cloud layer. The sky here was a deep, almost surreal blue untouched by the haze below. The sun was fully clear now, gleaming off the canopy and painting the cockpit with warm light. He looked down briefly. The clouds stretched endlessly, like an unbroken white plain. Somewhere far beneath, the earth continued its mourning as if unaware of the machine now carving through its skies. He allowed himself a small exhale, controlled, measured. This was the payoff of that tense, silent moment on the runway: raw velocity, altitude, and freedom. Still, there was no slowing down. His mission was just beginning, and the climb would carry him higher yet. But as the air thinned and the roar steadied into a powerful hum, he felt the shift inside himself. The spring that had been coiled tight in his chest had finally been released, and it had exploded into the sky. The climb was over. The jet had reached its intended altitude, but the sense of motion didn't slow. It transformed. Down low, speed was something you could see in the blur of ground objects rushing past. Up here, speed was different. It was invisible. It was in the way the horizon stayed distant, no matter how far you flew toward it. It was in the constant hum and vibration through the airframe. It was in the steady push of G-forces that made you aware you were riding something far, beyond human muscle or stamina. Below, the earth stretched into an endless mosaic. Patches of forest, pale strips of roads, shining mirrors of lakes catching the sunlight. The city he'd left behind was now just a faint smudge on the horizon, swallowed by distance and haze. It was strange how quickly the familiar became miniature from this vantage point, as if the jet's ascent had also pulled him out of time. The cockpit was bathed in the crisp, unwavering light of the high-altitude morning. Here, the sun didn't flicker through clouds or shift behind buildings. It blazed steadily, painting the metal panels in sharp contrasts. The canopy glass curved above him, turning the world outside into a vast, uninterrupted panorama. He eased the stick slightly, feeling the jet respond with precision. Every motion was immediate, smooth, exact. It was like steering a blade through the air, every angle, every shift, cutting without resistance. Up here, there was no sound from the outside world. No voices, no city noise, no wind rushing in your ears, only the constant layered roar of the engines. It wasn't just noise, it was the jet's heartbeat, an unbroken promise of power. The afterburners had been throttled back now, but the engines still carried a deep, relentless thrust, like ocean waves that never stopped. He glanced at the HUD. Speed. Mach 1.1. Supersonic. He didn't feel it the way people might imagine. There was no sudden jolt. No tearing sensation. Just an almost imperceptible shift in the pitch of the engine's voice, and the knowledge that somewhere behind him, a sonic boom had just raced outward across the ground far below. Flying at this speed, the world changed, in subtle ways. The clouds no longer seemed to drift. They appeared to hold still, as though the jet was the one dragging the sky past. The blue above deepened toward indigo, hinting at the thinness of the atmosphere here. He banked slightly to the right, and the horizon tilted, a massive arc of the earth rolling across his vision. Far below, a river wound through the land, glinting, in the sun like a silver thread. From this height, it looked peaceful, unchanging, but he knew that if he descended toward it, the calm picture would shatter into currents, wind, and motion. For now, though, the jet remained in its element. Up here, where only machines and birds of steel could survive. The air was thin, but the engines breathed it like it was made for them. A soft beep on the console signaled an altitude adjustment request from the flight plan. He tapped a control, feeling the nose pitch upward just slightly. The horizon sank, a fraction, and the earth grew more distant. The sky's color shifted again, bluer still, and in that purity of light, he could see the faintest curve of the earth. Not an illusion, not a trick of the eyes, but the real shape of the planet. It was humbling and exhilarating all at once, as if speed had not only lifted him physically, but also peeled back a layer of reality to reveal its hidden geometry. He thought about how quickly this flight had unfolded. Just minutes ago, he was locked in silence on the runway. Then came the ignition, the roar, the acceleration, the tearing climb. And now he was here, in an altitude so high and a speed so great that the whole sequence felt like it belonged to a single heartbeat stretched into slow motion. The jet sliced through a thin band of cirrus clouds. They didn't tumble away from the wings the way low clouds did. They simply parted, like cold mist disturbed by a passing shadow. Wisps of vapor curled in brief spirals before dissolving in the wake. He could feel the jet's stability, its engineered perfection. This wasn't a car that rattled on a bad road or a ship that heaved with the waves. This was balance. Every surface, every joint, every sensor worked in concert, responding instantly to both his inputs and the invisible shifts of the atmosphere. A glance to his right revealed another world entirely. The sun reflecting so sharply off the wing that it seemed molten. The paint shimmered under the glare, heat rippling faintly along the metal. At these speeds, the air itself warmed the skin of the aircraft. The HUD flickered again, Mach 1.3. He pushed slightly forward on the throttle, and the number climbed. 1.4, 1.5. The horizon seemed to bow backward as he pushed deeper into the sky's quiet violence. Far below somewhere, people were going about their mornings, drinking coffee, walking to work, glancing up at a faint contrail without ever seeing, the machine racing at its tip. To them, the jet was a distant streak. To him, the contrail was a byproduct of a living, breathing symphony of speed. The radio crackled briefly, a check-in from the ground, but it felt almost intrusive, a human voice cutting into this rarefied space. He answered quickly, his voice calm, his mind still wrapped in the experience of flight. A bank to the left this time. The horizon swung smoothly again, revealing a vast expanse of mountains in the far distance. Even from here, their snow-capped peaks glinted with sharp clarity. In less than a minute, he was over them, the rugged terrain shrinking just as the city had. Every so often, a flicker of light danced along the cockpit glass as sunlight caught on instruments, helmet, or gloved hands. It was a reminder of how small the space around him was compared to the infinite space outside. The jet was a capsule of order moving through an ocean of atmosphere. He leveled out again, letting the speed settle just below Mach 2. The engines held the pace effortlessly. It was almost deceptive how something so violent in potential could feel so smooth in execution. This was the purest moment of the flight. No acceleration, no climb, no descent, just sustained, impossible velocity. The kind of speed that made distances irrelevant and turned the world into a continuous horizon. He let his gaze wander one last time over the endless curve of the earth, the deep blue above, and the white sprawl of clouds below. In that view, everything seemed both massive and fragile. And then, with a steady breath, he adjusted course. There was still a mission ahead, but in this moment, between the roar of engines and the silence of space, he understood why pilots called this the realm of freedom. Because up here, above the clouds, at twice the speed of sound, nothing could catch him. Nothing even came close.